Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto summoned Nami and Robin for harem? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. An unforeseen summoning. The peace was a heavy blanket. A year had passed since the war, since the fall of Kagaya and the final, searing clash with Sasuke at the Valley of the End. Konohagakure was rebuilding, its streets once more filled with the murmur of commerce and the laughter of children who had never known a world without its hero, Naruto Uzumaki. And Naruto, the epicenter of that peace, had never felt more alone. He stood atop the Hokage monument, the wind whipping his blonde hair across the carved stone face of his father. Below, the village lights twinkled like a fallen constellation, each one a life he had saved, a future he had secured. He was the hero, the savior, the most powerful shinobi in the world. The adoration was a constant, suffocating presence, a sea of smiling faces and grateful whispers that made him feel like he was drowning. They loved the symbol, the Jinchuriki who had tamed the beast and saved the world. But the man, the orphan who once craved any connection at all, felt a chasm widening between himself and everyone else. It's too quiet, he thought, the silence of his own mind a stark contrast to the years of Kurama's cynical grumbling. The fox was a calmer presence now, a true partner, but and he seemed to be in a state of semi-retirement, content to nap within the seal. It's not enough, Naruto murmured to the wind. He had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of. Sasuke was back, the villages were allied, and he was on the fast track to wearing the Hokage's hat. It was a perfect picture. So why did it feel so incomplete? It was a different kind of hunger, one that ramen and sparring with Lee couldn't satisfy. It was a yearning for the unknown, for a challenge that didn't involve the fate of the world, for a bond forged not from shared trauma, but from shared discovery. That same restless energy had driven him, weeks ago, into the one place he knew held secrets, the sealed archives beneath the Hokage Tower, where Jiraiya's unpublishable research was stored. It was a chaotic mess of espionage reports, failed experiments, and theoretical jutsu that were too dangerous or too absurd to see the light of day. Tucked away in a scroll case marked only with a symbol for catastrophic failure, he found it. It wasn't a summoning contract for toads or any other animal. The kanji was archaic, the ink infused with a trace of sage chakra that made the parchment hum. Eiyu no Shoken. Isekai no Koyaku. The hero summoning. Covenant of Otherworlds. Jiraiya's notes were frantic, almost unhinged. He theorized that if chakra was the lifeblood of their world, other worlds might exist with different energies. Different laws of physics. This jutsu was a key, a desperate, brute force method to punch a hole through the dimensional fabric and pull forth not a beast, but a sentient ally, a hero, from another reality. Bound by a covenant to aid the summoner. The jutsu required an immense, almost suicidal amount of chakra and a deep, resonant desire from the caster. It had never been successfully tested. The last attempt, according to a scorched addendum, had resulted in a 3-day crater and the complete memory loss of the unfortunate shinobi who tried it. It was insane. It was reckless. It was exactly what Naruto needed. Now, standing in the center of Training Ground 7, the place where his journey had truly begun, the scroll lay open before him. The moon was a silver sickle in the sky, casting long shadows from the 3 wooden posts that had borne witness to so much of his life. You're really going through with this, Kit? Kurama's voice was a low rumble in his mind, laced with a rare thread of concern. This isn't summoning a toad. The pervy sage himself labeled this a failure. You're trying to kick down a door without knowing what's on the other side. I know, Naruto said, biting his thumb and smearing a line of blood across the central seal. But I'm tired of this room, Kurama. I need to see what else is out there. I'm not looking for a weapon. I'm looking for something different. You could tear a hole in reality. You could invite something in that you can't put back. Then I'll deal with it, Naruto replied, his voice firm with the unshakable resolve that had ended a war. He began flashing through the hand seals, a complex sequence that felt alien and jagged compared to the familiar flow of his own techniques. Chakra, dense and golden, erupted from him, a roaring inferno of power that bent the grass flat against the ground. He poured his sage mode energy into it, then reached deeper, drawing on the vast, crimson ocean of Kurama's own reserves. The air began to crackle, to shimmer like heat haze. The seals on the scroll glowed with blinding white light, the ink lifting off the parchment to hover in the air, forming a swirling, three-dimensional gate. Naruto gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face as the jutsu greedily consumed his power. It wasn't just taking his chakra, it felt like it was pulling on his very soul, searching for the resonant desire Jiraiya had written about. He focused his mind, not on a warrior or a weapon, but on the feeling he craved, a connection with someone who saw him, not the hero. A partner in adventure, not just in battle. Suddenly, the controlled torrent became a cataclysm. The gate of light imploded, then exploded outward with a soundless shockwave that ripped the air apart. The world warped. For a terrifying second, Naruto's senses were overwhelmed. He saw a million different skies, smelled oceans of wine and forests of steel, heard the laughter of unseen stars. And through it all, he felt a chilling, malevolent awareness touch his own, a fleeting glimpse of a vast, shadowy consciousness, a being composed of countless hungry eyes and a silence that screamed. It was ancient and vast, and it whispered a single, incomprehensible word in a language of pure dread. Then, just as quickly, the vision was gone. Reality snapped back into place with the force of a physical blow. The light vanished, leaving behind a crater of smoking earth in the center of the training ground. The air smelled of ozone and something else, salt. The faint, unmistakable scent of the sea. And he was no longer alone. Two figures lay sprawled in the dirt. Both were women. One had brilliant, orange hair cut to her shoulders and was dressed in little more than a bikini top and jeans. The other had long, black hair, and her elegant, dark dress seemed strangely out of place on a battlefield. The orange-haired woman groaned first, pushing herself up on her elbows. Her brown eyes blinked, trying to focus. What was that? A waterspout. Robin, are you? She stopped, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. The crater, the three wooden posts, the blonde-haired man in the strange black and orange outfit standing 20 feet away. His chest heaving. This wasn't the deck of the Thousand Sunny. This wasn't the sea. Who the hell are you? She demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. She scrambled to her feet, pulling a blue, three-section staff from a holster on her leg. Did you kidnap us? The black-haired woman, Robin, rose with a fluid grace that belied the violent nature of her arrival. She brushed the dirt from her dress, her blue eyes calm and analytical as they scanned Naruto, the surrounding forest, the carved faces on the mountain in the distance. She said nothing, but her posture was coiled, ready. Naruto held up his hands, his mind reeling. This wasn't what he expected. They weren't warriors in armor or sages in robes. They were just women. Dressed strangely, to be sure, but they didn't radiate the kind of power he was used to sensing. Look, I can explain, he started, taking a step forward. This is a misunderstanding. That was the wrong move. Stay back, the orange-haired woman snapped. She clicked the sections of her staff together, holding the now long pole defensively. I'm warning you, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. I didn't mean to bring you here, he tried again, his voice calm and even. That scroll, he didn't get to finish. With a flick of her wrist, she swung the staff. Thunderbolt tempo, a dark cloud, no bigger than a dinner plate, materia. Released out of thin air just above Naruto's head. Before he could even process the absurdity of it, a powerful bolt of lightning erupted from the cloud, striking the ground where he had been standing. He leapt back just in time. The air crackling with static electricity, his hair standing on end. What the? That's not a jutsu, he exclaimed, shocked. There were no hand seals, no chakra buildup he could sense. She had just made a storm. While he was distracted, the other woman acted. Dos manos, Robin said, her voice a low murmur as she crossed her arms. Suddenly, two arms sprouted from Naruto's own shoulders, their hands locking together in a perfect clasp around his neck, choking him. Simultaneously, more arms bloomed from his back and legs, pinning his own limbs, immobilizing him completely. He struggled, but the grip was like steel. He couldn't move, couldn't form a seal. Nami, his hands, Robin said calmly. Don't let him clasp them together. Nami nodded, her initial panic hardening into focused aggression. She pointed her cleam attack at him. "All right, you've got 10 seconds to tell us where we are and how to get back to our ship before I cook you from the inside out." Naruto grunted, straining against the disembodied limbs. This was bad. They were far more dangerous than they looked. Raw power wouldn't work here. They were too coordinated, their abilities too bizarre. He needed to think. Okay, plan B. He stopped struggling, forcing his body to go limp. His sudden lack of resistance surprised them. Robin's grip loosened fractionally. That was all he needed. Kurama. Now, a tidal wave of red, malevolent chakra erupted from him. The sheer force of the killing intent washed over the two women like a physical blow. It was the raw, untamed power of a tailed beast, an aura of pure predatory rage that had made armies tremble. Nami staggered back, her face pale, the cleam attack nearly slipping from her trembling fingers. She had faced down monsters and tyrants, but this feeling was something else entirely. It was like staring into the sun and seeing a hungry eye stare back. Robin's composure finally broke, her eyes wide with shock. The arms pinning Naruto vanished as her concentration shattered. Naruto didn't press the attack. The red chakra receded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the powerful, golden glow of his own. He stood freely now, not moving closer. His hands held open in a gesture of peace. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice resonating with a power that had nothing to do with intimidation. "I'm the one who summoned you. Accidentally. I swear on my life. I meant you no harm." Nami was still breathing heavily, her knuckles white on her staff. "What was that? That feeling? That was my partner," Naruto said simply. "He doesn't like it when people try to choke me." Robin had recovered more quickly, her sharp mind already processing the new information. "Summoned," she repeated, her gaze flicking to the scorched scroll on the ground. "You used that to bring us here. From our world." The concept was fantastic, yet given their current circumstances, undeniable. Yes, it was a forbidden jutsu. It was supposed to call for an ally, a hero. "I didn't know who or what would answer," Naruto explained, his sincerity evident in his clear blue eyes. He looked from Nami's suspicious glare to Robin's calculating gaze. "My world is called the Elemental Nations. This is Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. You're a long, long way from home. And right now, I don't know how to send you back." The finality of his words hung in the night air. Nami's face fell, the fight draining out of her to be replaced by a dawning horror. Stranded, in another world, it was a nightmare. Robin, however, seemed intrigued. Her eyes swept over the Hokage monument again. "A world built by shinobi," she mused, the word foreign on her tongue. "A history unknown to my own. Fascinating." She stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Nami's arm. "He isn't lying, Nami. There's no deceit in his voice. And that power he just released, if he wanted us dead, we would be." She turned her analytical gaze back to Naruto. "You saved us from a fight. And now you have stranded us in your world. A debt is owed, Naruto Uzumaki. And we will need your protection until it can be repaid." Nami looked at Robin, then back at the blonde man who seemed both incredibly powerful and strangely earnest. He wasn't like the Marines or the pirates she was used to. There was no greed in his eyes, no overt malice. Just a deep well of power and something that looked like regret. "Fine," Nami conceded, lowering her cleam attack, though she didn't put it away. "A truce. For now. But if you're lying, or if you try anything funny, I'll zap you so hard your ancestors will feel it. And you'll pay for our passage back." With interest, Naruto managed a small, tired smile. "Fair enough." A fragile, uneasy peace settled over the clearing. The three of them stood in the smoking crater. A hero who had gotten more than he bargained for, a navigator whose maps were now useless, and an archaeologist who had just stumbled upon the greatest lost history of all. They were strangers, bound by a failed jutsu and an uncertain future. And high above, in the space between worlds, the multi-eyed shadow that Naruto had disturbed turned its ancient, hungry gaze toward the tiny, flickering light of a new world ripe for the harvest. The summoning had not gone unanswered after all. It had simply been heard by the wrong entity. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Strangers in a Strange Leaf. The walk from the training ground to the Hokage Tower was a strange, silent procession. The moonlit streets of Konoha were quiet, the paper lanterns outside shuttered storefronts casting a soft, warm glow on the cobblestones. For Naruto, it was a familiar, comforting sight. For his two companions, it was an alien landscape. Nami walked with a tense, coiled energy, her eyes darting everywhere, cataloging exits, rooftop heights, and the strange, sloping architecture of the buildings. She clutched her klima tacked like a lifeline, her expression a mixture of awe and deep-seated suspicion. Robin, by contrast, moved with an unhurried, graceful poise, her gaze sweeping over the intricate wooden carvings on the eaves of houses and the kanji characters painted on shop signs. She was not a tourist. She was a scholar entering a living library. "What are those faces on the mountain?" Robin asked, her voice a low, melodic murmur that cut through the silence. Naruto glanced up at the Hokage monument. Its stone faces illuminated by the moon. "They're the Hokage, the leaders of our village. The first, the second, my master's master, my teacher, and my dad." A flicker of old pain and new pride crossed his face. "You carved the faces of your leaders into a mountain," Nami muttered, half to herself. "Talk about an ego." Naruto just chuckled. "It's about respect. They protected this village with their lives." The Hokage Tower loomed before them, the largest and most important building in Konoha. The guards at the entrance, seasoned Chunin, tensed as the trio approached, their yes lingering on the strangely dressed newcomers. They snapped to attention, however, when they recognized Naruto, offering a crisp salute that he returned with a casual wave. The respect he commanded was palpable, and it did not go unnoticed by Nami or Robin. They found Tsunade in her office, not behind her desk, but standing by the large window overlooking the village, a half-empty bottle of sake on the sill beside her. She was no longer Hokage in title. That mantle had passed to Kakashi, but her authority and influence remained immense. The fifth Hokage, the Godime, was still a force of nature. Shizune stood nearby, looking worried, a stack of paperwork clutched in her hands. Tsunade turned as they entered, her sharp brown eyes immediately assessing the two women. She took in Nami's defiant posture and Robin's unsettling calm. "Naruto," she said, her voice gravelly. "You look like you've had a rough night. And you've brought guests." Naruto ran a hand through his hair, the adrenaline from the earlier confrontation finally beginning to fade, leaving a deep exhaustion in its place. "You could say that, Grandma Tsunade. This is Nami, and this is Robin." There was an incident with one of Jiraiya-sensei's old scrolls. Over the next half hour, Naruto explained everything, the forbidden jutsu, his reckless curiosity, and the accidental summoning. He took full responsibility, leaving no room for blame to fall on the two women who now stood before one of the most powerful figures in their new world. Tsunade listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she took a long pull from her sake bottle before speaking. "Other worlds," she mused, her gaze locking onto Robin. "Powers that don't use chakra. And you," she said, shifting her attention to Nami, "can create lightning from a stick." Jiraiya was a brilliant fool. This sounds exactly like one of his half-baked ideas. Nami bristled slightly. "It's not a stick, it's a sorcery klima tact. And I'm the best navigator in the world. Now, about our situation," she began, shifting into her element, negotiation. "We'll need accommodations, provisions, and access to any relevant information you have on trans-dimensional travel. We also need to know about the local economy. What's the exchange rate on belly to whatever you use here?" Tsunade raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips. "Belly, kid, you're not in a position to make demands. Your unidentified hostiles who appeared on Konoha soil were refugees," Robin corrected smoothly, her voice calm and steady. "Brought here against our will by one of your own shinobi. We only seek to understand our circumstances and find a way home. We are willing to cooperate fully in exchange for your protection and assistance." Her diplomatic T1 did more to soothe Tsunade than Nami's aggressive bargaining. The old Sanin studied them for a long moment, then sighed, the sound heavy with the weariness of a lifetime of impossible decisions. "Naruto vouches for you," she said finally, "and that carries more weight than anything else in this village right now. For now, you are guests of Konoha. You will be given lodging and a stipend. But you will be monitored. Do not mistake my hospitality for trust. She fixed them with a stare as hard as steel. If you prove to be a threat to my village, not even Naruto can protect you from me. Am I clear? Crystal, Nami said, her chin held high. Robin simply offered a polite, enigmatic smile. Thank you, Godime-sama. An hour later, Naruto led them away from the formal tension of the Hokage Tower and into the warm, savory-scented embrace of Ichiraku Ramen. The small stand was an oasis of normalcy in his chaotic life, and he hoped it could be for them, too. This is the best restaurant in the village? Nami asked skeptically, eyeing the simple wooden counter and steaming vats of broth. It's the best restaurant in the world, Naruto declared, hopping onto a stool. Hey, Tsuki Oji, Ayame Nichan, 3 miso pork ramens, extra chashu. Tsuki, his face creased with a permanent smile, looked up from his noodles. Naruto, good to see you, and who are your lovely friends? The meal was a revelation. For Nami and Robin, it was a simple, delicious taste of a new world. For Naruto, it was a chance to watch them lower their guards. He saw Nami's eyes light up as she tasted the rich broth. Her earlier suspicion melting away into pure, simple enjoyment. He watched as she expertly deduced the stand's weekly profits based on the foot traffic and the cost of ingredients, impressing Ayame with her sharp business sense. Robin was quieter, but she observed everything. She watched how the other patrons greeted Naruto not with the awe of a distant hero, but with the familiar affection of a neighbor. She saw the genuine warmth he shared with the father and daughter who ran the stand. Here, he wasn't the savior of the world, he was just Naruto. And in that simple truth, she understood him more than she had from his display of immense power. So, Naruto said between slurps of noodles, what was your world like? Nami paused, her chopsticks hovering over a slice of pork. Big, she said, a hint of longing in her voice. Mostly ocean. A world of islands, pirates, and adventure. We were sailing on our way to the next island. We are part of a crew, Robin added, dabbing her lips with a napkin. A family, of a sort. They will be worried. The mention of their family, their crew, struck a chord with Naruto. He understood that kind of bond better than anyone. We'll find a way to get you back to them, he said. His voice quiet but firm. I promise. For the first time since she'd arrived, Nami looked at him and saw not a kidnapper or a threat, but a potential ally. Maybe even a friend. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. Naruto, using his newfound influence, secured them a small but comfortable apartment near his own, complete with a stipend for living expenses, a detail that greatly pleased Nami. He gave them a tour of the village, a sprawling place of marketplaces, dojos, and hidden training grounds. Nami was drawn to the commercial heart of Konoha. She was a whirlwind in the marketplace, haggling with vendors, learning the currency, ryo, and quickly establishing a reputation as a shrewd but charming bargainer. She saw a world of opportunity, of new trade goods and untapped markets. She was a navigator, and she was already charting a course to prosperity in this new land. Robin, predictably, found her sanctuary in the Konoha Great Library. The sheer volume of recorded history, of jutsu theory and clan lineages, was intoxicating to her. She spent hours poring over ancient scrolls, her unique ability to read any language proving invaluable. She found the accounts of the Sage of Six Paths and the origin of chakra particularly fascinating. The story of a great, world-shaping power, of a hidden history, and of a progenitor figure who brought enlightenment. It all felt like a distorted echo of the void century she had spent her life chasing. She wasn't just reading history, she felt she was on the verge of discovering a fundamental link between their worlds. Their peaceful integration, however, was not viewed favorably by all. Naruto was summoned before the Konoha Council, not in the Hokage's office, but in the sterile, windowless chamber where the village's true, often harsh decisions were made. Kakashi was there, in his official Hokage robes, but it was the elders, Homura and Kaharu, who led the interrogation. They were relics of a bygone era, their faces etched with the paranoia of 3 great wars. Uzumaki Naruto, Homura began, his voice dry as dust. You have brought 2 undocumented individuals into this village. They wield unknown abilities and have no allegiance to Konoha. They are a security risk of the highest order. They are guests under my watch, Naruto replied, his voice level. He stood in the center of the room, not as a defendant, but as an equal. Your watch is irrelevant, Koharu snapped. They are anomalies. For the safety of this village, they must be contained. We will take them into the custode. Why of the Intelligence Division for thorough interrogation and analysis. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Interrogation by Ibiki and Inoichi's successors was not a pleasant affair. Kakashi shifted, his visible eye conveying his discomfort. Naruto, the elders have a point. We know nothing about them. I know enough, Naruto interrupted, his voice dropping, losing its easygoing warmth and taking on the hard edge of a man who had faced down gods. He swept his gaze across the council, his blue eyes as sharp and cold as ice. I know they were ripped from their home because of my mistake. I know they defended themselves when they were scared and confused. And I know they are not a threat. You cannot know that, Homura insisted, slamming a wrinkled fist on the table. Your sentimentality is a liability. Naruto took a slow step forward, his presence filling the room, the sheer weight of his chakra a silent, crushing pressure. My sentimentality is what saved this village. It's what saved all of you. Let me make this perfectly clear. He paused, letting his words sink in. There was no shouting, no explosive burst of anger. Just the quiet, unshakable authority of a man who knew his own power. Nami and Nico Robin are not prisoners. They are not subjects for interrogation. They are citizens of Konoha under my personal protection. Any attempt to harm them, to detain them, or to interfere with them in any way will be considered a personal attack against me. He looked each elder in the eye. And you do not want me as your enemy. Is that understood? The chamber was utterly silent. The elders stared, their faces a mixture of shock and fury at his audacity. They were the council, the pillars of Konoha's political structure. But the boy in front of them was a pillar of the entire world. His influence was absolute, his power unmatched. They had no move to make. Naruto turned and walked out of the chamber without another word, leaving the stunned council in his wake. He had drawn a line in the sand. Not with a Rasengan, but with his will alone. That night, in the shadows of a nondescript alleyway, a figure in a blank-faced Anbu mask knelt before a drainpipe. He tucked a small, coded scroll deep inside it. He was a root operative, one of the last vestiges of Danzo's fanatical ideology, but his loyalty had been purchased by a new, darker power. The scroll's message was brief. The anomalies have been granted Uzumaki's protection. They are integrating. Observation continues. The sovereign's harvest will be patient. The agent then melted back into the shadows, a ghost in his own village. Serving a god that no one yet knew existed. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sunagaker Gambit. The hawk arrived just after dawn, a speck of darkness against the fiery orange sky. It was a Sunagaker bird, its flight path direct and urgent, carrying a scroll stamped with the Casecage's personal seal. Kakashi, as Hokage, received it in his office, with Naruto present to give his morning report. The message from Gaara was concise and bleak. A drought, unprecedented in its severity, had seized the land of wind. It was more than a mere absence of rain. The land itself felt like it was dying. The great rivers that flowed from the north had dwindled to trickles miles before they reached Suna's territory. Wells that had never run dry were now just holes filled with dust. Worse, their most skilled water-style users were powerless. Their jutsu would fizzle and evaporate, the chakra dissipating into the unnaturally dry air as if being devoured by the heat itself. Sunagaku. Ri was a fortress built to withstand any army, but it could not survive without water. Unrest was beginning to stir. Naruto's expression hardened as Kakashi read the report aloud. Gaara was not just an ally. He was one of Naruto's most cherished friends, a brother forged in the fires of loneliness and redemption. I'm going, Naruto said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'll leave within the hour. Kakashi nodded, his visible eye crinkling. I expected as much. Take who you need. A thought sparked in Naruto's mind, a connection that was both logical and, he had to admit, a little exciting. The problem is the weather. An unnatural atmospheric phenomenon, he reasoned, thinking aloud. We have an expert meteorologist living in Konoha now. Kakashi leaned back in his chair, the gears turning behind his lazy demeanor. You mean Nami. It's a risk, Naruto. We still know very little about them. It's a bigger risk not to use every advantage we have, Naruto countered. And Robin's knowledge of history and ancient texts. Gaara mentioned strange patterns in the sand. She might see something we'd miss. This is the perfect chance for them to prove they're allies. It was sound logic, a controlled, high-stakes field test. Kakashi gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. All right, but you're responsible for them. And for any international incidents they might cause. The journey to the land of wind was a stark education for Nami and Robin. The lush, vibrant green of the land of fire slowly bled away, replaced by hardy scrubland, then ochre plains, and finally, the endless, rolling dunes of the great desert. The heat was a physical presence, a smothering weight that shimmered above the sand. Naruto, a seemingly inexhaustible well of stamina, set a relentless pace, but he was mindful of his companions. He taught them the shinobi trick of drawing moisture from the air and conserving sweat, though Nami found her own meteorological knowledge of dew points and atmospheric humidity far more efficient. She was in her element in a different way, navigating not by maps, but by the subtle shifts in the wind, the position of the sun, and the patterns of the stars at night. It were clearer here than any she had ever seen on the Grand Line. Incredible, she murmured one night, sketching the unfamiliar constellations into a new notebook. The celestial bodies are completely different. I'll have to create entirely new star charts. The prospect was daunting, but her eyes shone with the thrill of discovery. Robin, meanwhile, was captivated by the desert itself. She saw it not as an empty wasteland, but as a place of profound history, shaped by millennia of wind and sun. Using her Hana no Mi powers, she would sprout hands dozens of meters away to gently touch the surface of a unique rock formation or sift through the sand of a dry oasis, sensing the ghosts of what had once been. During a brief stop, as Naruto shared out their rations, a sudden, powerful gust of wind kicked up, threatening to become a sandstorm. Before Naruto could even suggest they find shelter, Nami was on her feet, tasting the air. It's just a surface squall, she announced confidently. It'll pass in 10 minutes. The high-altitude currents are stable. She was right. The wind died down as quickly as it had appeared. Naruto watched her, impressed. How did you know that? It's my job to know that. Nami replied with a smirk. You muscle-headed shinobi just punch things. Some of us use our brains. He just grinned. The playful barb was a sign she was finally starting to relax around him. Their arrival in Sunagaku was met with a mixture of hope and desperation. The village, carved from the living rock of a massive crater, was on edge. The streets were less crowded than usual, the faces of the people etched with worry. Gaara greeted them personally at the village gates, his usual stoic expression softened by genuine relief at seeing Naruto. Thank you for coming, the Kazekage said, his voice a low rasp. The situation is more dire than my message conveyed. In the council chambers, Gaara laid out the full extent of the crisis. He projected a map onto the table using sand, indicating the areas where the drought was most severe. As he spoke, Nami's eyes narrowed, noticing a pattern. The effect is centered here, she said, pointing to a vast, uninhabited stretch of desert to the east. It's radiating outward in a near-perfect circle. That's not a natural weather pattern. It's being anchored by something. While Nami began setting up a series of weather sensors around the village, Robin requested permission to visit the main riverbed, now a dry, cracked canyon of earth. Accompanied by a small contingent of Suna shinobi, she descended into the chasm. The shinobi saw only baked mud. Robin saw a crime scene. The erosion is wrong, she explained to the confused guards. A river drying up over time would leave smooth, sedimentary layers. This is fractured, as if the water was violently ripped away. She knelt, placing a hand on the cracked ground. See and fleur. 100 arms bloomed from the canyon floor, their hands delicately brushing away the top. Layers of sand and dust like 1,000 tiny archaeologists' tools. They worked for nearly an hour, revealing more and more of the bedrock beneath. And then they found it. Carved deep into the stone was a geometric line, part of a vast, intricate pattern. It was a seal, impossibly large and of a design she had never encountered. At the same time, Naruto stood with Gaara atop the Kazecage's building, his eyes closed in sage mode. The natural energy of the region was distorted. It felt thin and stretched, like a song being played out of key. He could feel it being drawn, pulled toward the same central point Nami had identified on the map. It's a drain, Naruto said, his eyes snapping open. Something is sucking the nature energy out of the land. That's why water jutsu won't work. There's nothing to sustain them. Their investigations all pointed to one place. An expedition was formed. As Naruto, Gaara, Nami, and Robin prepared to head into the desert, they were confronted by a group of elder Suna shinobi. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Kato, had been a rival of Gaara's father. Lord Kazekage, he said, his voice dripping with false deference. This is a Suna matter. We do not need the help of Konoha outsiders. Especially not these women. Their skills have proven invaluable, Gaara replied, his voice flat and cold. They come with me. Kato's eyes narrowed, but he bowed and stepped aside. The resentment, however, was a palpable heat in the air. Hours later, deep in the desert, the ambush came. Not from the elders, but from a younger, more radical faction loyal to them. Dozens of shinobi erupted from the sand, kunai flashing in the sun. Gaara, your weakness has brought this curse upon us. Their leader yelled. Sunagaker needs a true Kazekage. Gaara's sand rose, forming a defensive shield. Fools. The battle was immediate and chaotic. Naruto entered his Six Paths Sage mode, a blur of gold as he intercepted the main assault with a flurry of Rasengan and truth-seeking orbs. But the enemy was numerous, and they were trying to flank, to separate the group. Mirage Tempo, Nami shouted. She swung her cleam attack, and the air shimmered. Suddenly, a dozen images of Naruto appeared, charging in different directions, throwing the enemy formations into chaos. As a group of shinobi hesitated, she followed up. Gust Sword, a blade of concentrated, cutting wind shot from the end of her staff, knocking them off their feet. Robin acted with chilling precision. Sazenta Fleur. Clutch. From the backs and blind spots of the flanking shinobi, dozens of arms sprouted, grabbing limbs and necks with brutal efficiency. The sickening cracks of bone and choked-off cries that followed were a testament to her deadly power. She dismantled their attack without taking a single step. Together, the four of them were an unstoppable force. Gaara's absolute defense, Naruto's overwhelming offense, Nami's strategic control of the battlefield, and Robin's silent, inescapable neutralization techniques. The rogue shinobi were defeated in minutes. Pressing on, they finally reached the source. It was a vast, flat plateau of black rock, unnaturally smooth, where a moss sieve seal array was etched into the stone, glowing with a faint, malevolent purple light. In the center, a crystalline conduit pulsed, drawing in the very life of the desert. That's it, Nami breathed, her weather sensors going haywire. It's generating a massive, permanent high-pressure zone. To make it rain, I don't just need to create clouds. I have to punch a hole through an invisible mountain of air. Can you do it? Naruto asked. I can design the storm, she said, her mind working furiously. But I don't have the power to fuel it. Not on this scale. Naruto grinned. I think I can help with that. He entered Sage mode again, the orange pigmentation flaring around his eyes. He gathered a colossal amount of nature energy, so much that the air around him began to hum. But instead of creating a weapon, he held out his hand. Give me the Kleem attack. Nami hesitated for only a second before placing her precious weapon in his hand. Naruto laid his other hand over it, and poured the Sage Chakra directly into the device. The Kleem attack began to glow, vibrating with unimaginable power, its metallic sections humming in harmony with the energy of the world itself. He handed it back to her. It felt warm, thrumming with life. Nami's face was set with intense concentration. She raised the supercharged staff to the sky. This is for my friends back home. Black Ball. Ryun Rod. She unleashed the energy. A swarm of black clouds erupted from the Kleem attack, not dissipating, but growing, feeding on the Sage energy. They coalesced high in the sky, forming a single, monstrous thunderhead that blotted out the sun. The desert was plunged into an eerie twilight. Here it comes, she yelled over the rising wind. Thunder breed tempo. With a final, deafening crack, the sky ripped open. It wasn't rain, it was a deluge. A solid wall of water that slammed down onto the desert floor with the force of a waterfall. The sheer, concentrated force of the downpour shattered the high-pressure system. The seal array on the plateau sizzled, overloaded by the sudden infusion of pure, natural water. The purple light flickered and died. As the blessed rain washed over the parched land, it also cleaned the sand from the central conduit of the seal. Robin, who had been studying the intricate carvings, froze. The rain had revealed a tiny mark, etched with precision at the very heart of the complex array. It was a symbol she didn't recognize, but Naruto did. His blood ran cold. It was the same many-eyed sigil from his vision. The drought wasn't just an attack on Suna. It was a harvest. And they had just witnessed the handiwork of the silent, whispering god that was now hunting in their world. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Mist. The victory in Sunagakur cemented Nami and Robin's status in Konoha. They were no longer just strange guests under Naruto's protection. They were proven assets, wielders of unique and powerful abilities who had saved an allied nation. Respect begged, and to replace suspicion in the eyes of the villagers. Nami used her newfound clout to secure favorable trade deals for a small import-export business she was starting, while Robin was granted unprecedented access to Konoha's most restricted historical archives. For a few weeks, a semblance of normalcy settled over their strange new lives. But peace in the elemental nations was a fragile, fleeting thing. The request from Kurigakure, the village hidden in the mist, arrived not via hawk, but through a high-level diplomatic envoy. The situation was too sensitive for a standard message. The new Mizukage, Chojuro, one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist, was facing a full-blown insurrection. A charismatic and powerful rogue shinobi named Kyoku was leading a movement to restore the village to its infamous, Bloody Mist, era. He preached that the peace and alliances forged after the war were a sign of weakness, a betrayal of the village's proud, ruthless heritage. Normally, this would be a purely internal matter. The envoy explained to Kakashi and the trio in the Hokage's office. But Kyoku is using a powerful and unknown jutsu. It's not a standard genjutsu, it seems to infect the hearts of our people. It takes their fears, their resentments over our new policies, and amplifies them into uncontrollable rage. He can turn a crowd of concerned citizens into a murderous mob in seconds. We cannot move against him without slaughtering our own people. Naruto's jaw tightened. It was a cowardly way to fight, turning people's emotions into weapons against them. They need a small, specialized team to infiltrate Kyoku's main faction, identify the source of the jutsu, and neutralize him without igniting a full-scale civil war, Kakashi concluded, his gaze falling on Naruto, Nami, and Robin. Subtlety, not strength, is the key. This is your mission. A chill, colder than any mist jutsu, traced its way down Robin's spine. A charismatic leader rising to power on a tide of fear. A government that twisted history to justify brutality. An ideology that demonized peace and glorified strength. It was the doctrine of the world government, the philosophy that had incinerated her home and hunted her for 20 years. This wasn't just a mission. It was a ghost from her past, wearing a new face. The journey to the land of water was by sea, a welcome change for Nami. She stood at the bow of the swift Konoha vessel. The salt spray on her face, reading the ocean currents and the wind with an innate mastery that left the shinobi crew in awe. The infamous mists that perpetually shrouded the island nation, a treacherous navigational hazard for most, were an open book to her. She guided them through the labyrinthine channels and rocky shoals as if she'd been sailing these waters her entire life. Her confidence and joy were infectious, a bright spot of warmth against the creeping dread of their mission. Kurigakure was a village holding its breath. The unique, cylindrical architecture rose into a sky thick with oppressive gray mist. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the whispers in the streets divided between loyalty to the young, progressive Mizukage and the seductive, powerful rhetoric of Kyoku. They entered not as heroes, but as wandering travelers, their Konoha headbands tucked away. They split up to gather information, their distinct skills perfectly suited to the task. Nami, with her easy charm and a few well-placed ryo, found her way into the taverns where disgruntled shinobi aired their grievances. She listened to their talk of feeling left behind, of their pride being tarnished by Chojuro's diplomacy, and she began to map the web of Kyoku's support network. Naruto, forced to suppress his bright, boisterous nature, became a shadow. He used his transformation jutsu to move through the crowds. listening, observing, and fighting the constant, burning urge to just find Kyoku and punch him into next week. It was a hard-won lesson in patience, a skill he was only now beginning to master. Robin was the most effective. She found a quiet inn and, from the privacy of her room, began her work. Ojos fleur. Eyes bloomed like dark flowers in the shadowed corn. RS of back alleys and on the damp stone walls of suspected meeting halls. Orejas fleur. Ears sprouted near hidden windows, picking up hushed conversations. She became a silent, all-seeing intelligence network, piecing together Kyoku's plans, his command structure, and the nature of his power. She learned that his jutsu, the Kyofu no Dokoku, lament of resentment, wasn't cast on individuals, but on an area. It created a field of corrupting chakra that lay dormant until activated by a specific emotional trigger, a keyword in a speech, a symbol flashed to the crowd. It preyed on existing doubt and magnified it 1,000-fold. Their investigation culminated one afternoon in the main plaza. A peaceful demonstration against a new trade agreement with the Land of Fire was underway. Chojuro himself was there, trying to reason with the crowd. Naruto, Nami, and Robin watched from different vantage points as one of Kyoku's lieutenants moved through the protesters. He didn't speak, but he made a subtle hand gesture. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The air crackled with invisible energy. The faces in the crowd twisted, their expressions of concern curdling into masks of pure rage. Hants for debate became screams for blood. A thrown rock became a volley. The protest became a riot. Chojiro's Anbu guards were forced to form a defensive wall, their goal no longer to reason, but merely to survive. Robin watched in horror, her hands trembling. She saw the faces of the scholars of Ohara in the faces of the rioters, good, intelligent people twisted by a hateful ideology until they were unrecognizable. They use fear to make people complicit in their own destruction, she whispered to Naruto later that evening, her voice strained. They burn the books, then they burn the people who read them. This Kyoku, he is no different from Spandine. Naruto saw the deep, raw pain in her eyes. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. Then we'll stop him, not just for Kiri, but for Ohara, too. Their infiltration of Kyoku's stronghold, an ancient, repurposed fortress on the misty cliffs overlooking the village, was set for the following night. Kyoku was holding a massive rally, a final push to galvanize his forces for a coup d'état against the Mizukage. They moved through the fortress like ghosts. When they finally reached the main chamber, a massive cavern filled with thousands of fervent followers. Kyoku was on a raised dais, his voice echoing with charismatic fury. He was tall and imposing, with silver hair and eyes that burned with fanatical conviction. Quote, Chojuro asks you to befriend your enemies. I ask you to remember your strength. He offers you peace. I offer you glory. The path of the bloody mist is the path of power. As the crowd roared, he saw them. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. And it seems we have guests from Konoha. The hero, and his curiosities. The chamber doors slammed shut. You seek to stop me. Kyoku's voice dropped to a whisper. But it carried across the entire cavern. First, you must face the truths you hide from yourselves. Kyofu no Dokoku. The corrupting chakra washed over them, a wave of pure psychic poison. The world around them dissolved, replaced by their deepest fears. Nami found herself back on a dusty road in Kokoyashi village. Arlong stood over her, his saw-nosed grin a nightmare made real. Still chasing money, little thief. He sneered, his voice dripping with venom. You think these new friends are any different? You're just a tool to them. A mapmaker. Once you're no longer useful, they'll cast you aside. Just like everyone else. For Naruto, the adoring faces of the Konoha villagers twisted into leering, hollow masks. Hero. They chanted, the word becoming an insult. You saved us, so now you owe us your life. You can never be free. You're just a weapon, a pet. His deepest fear, that their gratitude was a cage, and his loneliness was a permanent sentence, rose up to choke him. But the attack was most vicious on Robin. She was back on the shores of a burning Ohara. The monolithic ships of the Buster Call filled the horizon. Vice Admiral Sakazuki stood before her, his face a merciless mask. You cannot escape your blood, demon child, he hissed. Everything you touch turns to ash. These new allies, this new life, You will be the cause of their destruction, too. Run. It's all you know how to do. The giant, laughing face of her friend Saul materialized in the flames, melting away as he cried her name. It was a perfect, crippling assault. They faltered, their own minds turned into prisons. But then, through the haze of his own fear, Naruto heard Robin's choked sob. It was a sound of such profound despair that it shattered his illusion. His friends were in pain. And nothing was more important than that. No, he growled, forcing the phantoms from his mind. He looked at Kyoku, his blue eyes blazing with golden light as sage energy flooded his system. He wasn't a weapon. He was a protector. You're wrong. Quote, he didn't form a Rasengan. He didn't summon a clone. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his fists, but with his heart. He felt the fear and anger of the crowd. The pain Kyoku was manipulating. And beneath it, he felt their hope for a better life. He poured his own feelings into that connection, his belief in second chances, his unwavering faith in the bonds between people. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated empathy, a talk no jutsu on a godlike scale. The rage in the chamber didn't vanish, but it was blunted, confused by the injection of raw hope. Seeing Naruto's stand, Robin found her own strength. The images of Ohara still burned, but they no longer controlled her. They were a part of her, a scar, not a cage. She took a step forward, her voice clear and steady, cutting through Kyoku's lingering influence. You speak of glory and strength, she called out, her words resonating with the authority of someone who had studied the rise and fall of tyrants. The glory of child soldiers graduating over the corpses of their friends. The strength of a village that eats its own. That is not power, it is a sickness, a dark chapter in a history book that this world has, thankfully, moved on from. She locked eyes with Kyoku. You are not a revolutionary. You are just a ghost, haunting a house that is no longer empty. Her words, logical and true, were a splash of cold water on the crowd's fevered minds. Nami, shaking off the phantom of Arlong, provided the final move. My friends are not tools, she whispered, her eyes flashing with anger. She raised her claim attacked. And neither am I. But she didn't aim at Kyoku. She pointed it at the cavern ceiling. Fog tempo. A thick, dense fog billowed out, instantly filling the entire chamber. But this wasn't the ominous mist of Kurigakure. It was cool and clean, and as the crowd inhaled it, a sense of calm washed over them. During her intelligence gathering, Nami had identified a lock. Owl herb with powerful sedative properties. She had acquired a concentrated extract and loaded it into a special dial in her staff. The rage, already weakened by Naruto's empathy and Robin's logic, was finally put to sleep. The crowd wavered, their anger dissolving into confusion and exhaustion. Kyoku stood alone on his dais, his power base gone, his jutsu broken. He was just a man now, his ideologue. Why exposed as the hollow echo it truly was. In his cell beneath the Mizukage's tower hours later, a defeated Kyoku whispered to Chojuro. You don't understand. The shinobi world is weak, decadent. It needs to be purified by fire. His eyes were glazed over. He promised me the power to do it. The whispering god, the one who sleeps in the shadows. On the boat back to Konoha, the oppressive mists of the land of water finally parted, revealing a brilliant blue sky. Robin stood at the railing, watching the coastline recede, the sun warm on her face. She had faced the ghosts of Ohara and had not run. She had stood her ground, protected her friends, and used the painful knowledge of her past to build a better future. She was home. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Archaeologist's Secret. In the weeks that followed their return from the land of water, a quiet obsession took root in Nico Robin. While Nami bustled with entrepreneurial energy, establishing trade routes for rare mist village herbs, N.D. Naruto dealt with the endless duties of a global hero, Robin disappeared into the deep archives of Konoha. She had been granted access to the village's most ancient records, a privilege no outsider had ever received. And she pursued the knowledge within with a single-minded intensity that bordered on monastic. She wasn't interested in the grand histories of the shinobi wars or the lineages of the great clans. Her search was for something older, for the faint whispers of the time before. She found it in a dusty, forgotten corner of the scroll vault, a collection of heavy, basalt tablets, excavated from a site deep in the land of fire decades ago. They were covered in a complex, alien script that had baffled Konoha's finest scholars and cryptographers. Deemed untranslatable, they had been left to gather dust. The moment Robin saw them, she felt a jolt of profound recognition. The characters were not the same as the language of the poneglyphs, but they were related. The structure, the phonetic components, the elegant, geometric flow, it was like looking at the face of a distant ancestor. She knew, with a certainty that resonated in her very bones, that she could read them. Her days became a blur of focused work. She had the tablets moved to a private study, where she spent hours on end, painstakingly cross-referencing the archaic symbols with the linguistic roots of her own world's lost language. Nami would bring her meals, chiding her gently for forgetting to eat. Naruto would stop by, offering to help, only to be met with a polite but firm dismissal. "This is a puzzle I must solve alone, Naruto-san," she would say, her eyes never leaving the stone surfaces. A quiet tension grew. Her friends saw her obsession as unhealthy, a retreat into the familiar solitude of her past. They didn't understand that she was not retreating, she was on the hunt. After nearly 2 weeks of relentless effort, the breakthrough came. The tablets did not contain a history, they contained a warning. They spoke of a primordial age, long before the tales of the Sage of Six Paths. They described an entity not born of their world, but one that had arrived from the silent, starless void between realities. It had no true name, only titles of dread. The Devourer of Worlds, the Sovereign of Absolute Silence, the Kage no O, the Shadow Sovereign. It was a being of pure, conceptual nothingness, and its presence was antithetical to life itself. It did not conquer, it erased. A cataclysmic war had been waged against it. A war led not just by the Sage of Six Paths, but by him and his siblings, a detail of history that had been completely lost to time. They discovered they could not destroy the Kage no O. How could one kill a thing that was the embodiment of the void? So they had done the only thing they could. They had imprisoned it. Using their combined power, they had performed a fuinjutsu of unimaginable scale, weaving the very fabric of reality into a cage, sealing the entity in a dimensional rift. Robin's blood ran cold as she translated the final, most terrible passage. The seal was not perfect. It could be weakened by a specific, forbidden ritual, a jutsu that created an uncontrolled tear in the dimensional fabric, requiring a massive offering of vital energy and a resonant desire to connect with that which lies beyond. The scroll, Jiraiya's scroll, it wasn't a summoning jutsu. It was a corrupted fragment of the sealing ritual's key. The horror of the revelation settled upon her like a physical weight. Naruto's desperate loneliness, his yearning for connection, had been the perfect, resonant desire. The immense power of his and Kurama's chakra had been the perfect offering. Their arrival hadn't been an accident caused by a failed jutsu. They were a consequence. He Shadow Sovereign had used the energy of Naruto's ritual, guiding it, allowing it to succeed in a twisted fashion, to rip a hole in its own prison. They were the key that had partially unlocked the cage from the inside. The drought in Suna, the wave of hatred in Kiri, it was the Sovereign's influence seeping through the cracks, harvesting the energy of chaos and despair to widen the breach. The final tablet gave a location, a major nexus of the original sealing jutsu, a place of immense power hidden in a set of pre-shinobi ruins in the southern land of fire. She didn't run, she walked, her movements deliberate, and found Naruto and Nami on a training ground, engaged in a light-hearted sparring match. "I know what's happening," she said, her voice devoid of its usual calm. The gravity in her tone stopped them cold. "And I'm afraid it's all my fault." The ruins were nestled in a deep, mist-filled caldera, a place untouched by time. The architecture was nightmarish, built from oily, black stone carved with impossible angles that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. The air was heavy, still, and unnaturally cold, carrying an oppressive silence that even Naruto's sage-enhanced senses couldn't penetrate. "I don't like this place," Nami whispered, her klima tact held tight in her hands. "The atmospheric pressure is all wrong. It feels dead. The natural energy is stagnant," Naruto confirmed, his own usual confidence replaced by a grim watchfulness. "Corrupted." They found the central chamber, a vast, circular space with a collapsed altar at its center. The walls were covered in the same script as the tablets. As Robin stepped forward to examine them, the shadows in the room deepened, coalescing into solid forms. Figures in dark robes emerged from the walls themselves, their faces hidden behind porcelain masks etched with the many-eyed sigil. The cult of the Cage no O. Their leader stepped forward, his mask slightly more ornate than the others. He was tall and unnervingly slender, and when he spoke, his voice was a dry, rustling hiss. "The archaeologist," he said, his head tilting. "The key who unlocked the door. You have saved us centuries of effort. Our sovereign is most grateful. He has sent me to deliver his thanks, and to claim his prize." The cultists attacked. They moved with a silent, coordinated grace, wielding blades of solidified shadow. Naruto met them head-on. A golden blur of motion, but his attacks felt sluggish. The oppressive energy of the ruins was hampering his connection to nature. The leader, who Naruto would later learn was called Malachor, engaged him directly. "You reek of life, Jinchuriki," he hissed, his body erupting in a pattern of black markings. "Allow me to cure you of that ailment." It was sage mode, but a twisted, horrifying mockery of it. A shadow sage mode. Malachor was as fast and strong as Naruto, his movements fluid and deadly. He didn't use ninjutsu. He commanded the very darkness around them, forming razor-sharp tendrils and projectiles that Naruto's truth-seeking orbs struggled to negate. A Rasenshuriken, thrown at point-blank range, was simply swallowed by a vortex of shadow, its immense power vanishing without a trace. Nami's lightning bolts were absorbed into the darkness. Robin's sprouted arms were severed by the shadow blades before they could find their mark. They were completely on the defensive, outmatched by a power that defied the laws of their world. Malachor focused his attention on Robin, driving her back with a relentless assault. "It is your knowledge that threatens the great silence," he hissed, a blade of shadow narrowly missing her throat. "You read the words that should have remained forgotten. Our god's return is your legacy, demon child." The taunt hit its mark. Robin stumbled back, the weight of Ohara, of the seal, of everything, crashing down on her. Guilt was a poison, and it was paralyzing her. Seeing her falter, seeing Naruto being overwhelmed, something inside her snapped. The quiet scholar, the reserved historian, was burned away, leaving an iron core of protective fury. "I will not let you harm my friends," she roared, a wave of raw power erupting from her. She slammed her hands together. Gigante Fleur, an arm, the size of a tree trunk, erupted from the ground, swatting away a dozen cultists like flies. It was followed by another, and another, until a colossal upper torso, a giant effigy of Robin herself, rose from the chamber floor, its many arms forming a defensive wall around Naruto and Nami. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring sight, a desperate gambit that was draining her life force at an alarming rate. The sight of Robin's gargantuan clone, of her pushing herself to the brink of death to protect him, shattered Naruto's struggle. He wasn't just fighting a cultist, he was fighting for the woman who had crossed worlds and was now willing to sacrifice everything for him. He had to be more than just powerful. He had to be a miracle. He stopped trying to overpower the shadow. He had to purify it. Closing his eyes, he drew on the deepest well of his power, the light gifted to him by the Sage of Six Paths. He pulled his truth-seeking orbs close, not as weapons, but as anchors. A blinding, sun-like aura of pure, life-giving energy erupted from him, a conceptual opposite to the dead, stagnant chakra of the Shadow Sage. The oppressive darkness in the chamber didn't just recede, it evaporated, turning to steam against the sheer intensity of his light. Malachor screamed as the golden aura touched him, his Shadow Sage Mo. Sputtering as his connection to the sovereign was severed. This light, it is anathema. The clash of absolute light and absolute shadow was too much for the ancient ruins. The foundations groaned, and the ceiling began to collapse. "We have to go, now," Nami yelled. Naruto grabbed Robin, whose giant clone crumbled to dust as she collapsed from exhaustion, and leapt for the crumbling entrance, Nami right behind him. They escaped into the forest just as the entire ruin imploded, burying itself under a mountain of rock and earth. Hours later, miles away, they huddled around a small fire. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only exhaustion and the chilling reality of what they now faced. Robin, wrapped in a blanket, was trembling. "He was right," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My knowledge, it led us there. My existence is the reason the seal is broken." I am the demon child of Ohara all over again. I bring ruin to everyone I care about. Naruto moved to sit beside her, his expression serious. He waited until she met his eyes. My parents sealed a monster inside me to save our village, and for years I was treated like one, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I carried a burden I didn't choose, and I was alone. I know what that feels like, Robin. He reached out, gently taking her hand. You didn't break the seal. I did. I was the one who was too lonely and too reckless to leave that scroll alone. You didn't bring ruin. You brought us the truth. Your knowledge isn't a curse. It's the only weapon we have that can actually win this fight. You're not the demon child. You're our hope. Tears welled in Robin's eyes, not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her cursed knowledge, at the part of her that had caused so much pain, and called it hope. She leaned against him, the exhaustion finally claiming her, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. Nami sat on her other side, placing a reassuring hand on her back. Their small group a tiny island of warmth and light against a rising tide of cosmic darkness. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Navigator's Gambit. The revelation from the ruins sent a shockwave through Konoha's leadership. The scattered, seemingly political crises were now understood for what they were, calculated moves in a terrifyingly grand strategy. In the Hokage's strategy room, a grim atmosphere prevailed. Kakashi, Tsunade, and a deeply troubled Shikamaru Nara stood before a massive map of the elemental nations, littered with markers from the incidents in Suna and Kiri. The problem is, Shikamaru said, rubbing his temples, the gesture betraying his immense frustration, we're fighting a ghost. They have no capital, no known leaders apart from the ones we've already dealt with. And their followers are deep cover agents. They can strike anywhere, anytime. Strategically, it's a nightmare. We're purely reactive. We could increase patrols, tighten security at major sites, Kakashi suggested. Though his voice lacked conviction. A waste of resources, Shikamaru countered. It's like trying to guard an entire ocean from a single shark. We need to find their nest. But we have no idea where to even begin looking. As the greatest strategic minds of their generation found themselves stumped, Nami, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, stepped forward. She tapped a finger on the map. You're all thinking like shinobi, she stated, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. The statement was so blunt it bordered on disrespectful, yet her tone was one of pure, practical logic. You're looking for footprints, for hideouts and spies. You're trying to track the enemy's ships. She looked at them, her sharp brown eyes holding a navigator's certainty. You should be tracking the currents they travel on. Shikamaru's head tilted, a flicker of interest in his tired eyes. What do you mean? The drought in Suna, the jutsu in Kiri, the trap in those ruins. They all involved massive amounts of energy, Nami explained, her passion for the subject making her words flow faster. Think of natural energy, of chakra, as a force of nature, just like wind or ocean currents. It flows across the continent in predictable patterns, in great rivers of power that you call ley lines. These cultists aren't just appearing randomly. They are going to places where the current is strongest, or where they can build dams to collect the power they need. She looked directly at Shikamaru. Stop looking for the men. Start mapping the energy. If we can understand the flow, we can predict where they'll have to surface next. The room was silent for a beat, and then Shikamaru let out a slow breath, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time all day. The sheer, unorthodox brilliance of it was undeniable. It was a strategy that blended scientific methodology with shinobi sensory arts. What a drag, he said, the familiar phrase now imbued with a newfound energy. To think we'd be outsmarted by a pirate navigator. Kakashi-sama, we need to give her whatever she needs. For the next several days, Nami was given command of a small, elite unit of Konoha's best sensory ninja and cartographers. She transformed a strategy room into her personal workshop, covering the walls with massive, hand-drawn maps of the continent. While the Ensers fed her data on the ebb and flow of natural energy, Robin worked alongside her, cross-referencing the energy hotspots with ancient texts that spoke of historical battles, sealing sites, and places of forgotten power. Slowly, a pattern emerged from the chaos of data. 3 major energy ley lines, flowing from the north, south, and east, were all converging on a single, unexpected location, the Land of Iron. It's a neutral country of samurai, Kakashi said, perplexed. They don't use ninjutsu. What could the cult want there? Robin found the answer in a crumbling, leather-bound tome data. Illing the metallurgy of the elemental nations. The Land of Iron is famous for its chakra-disrupting armor and blades, she explained, pointing to a passage. That property comes from a unique, chakra, conductive metal found only in their mountains. It is an incredible insulator. But according to this text, if properly refined and forged, it is also the perfect battery for containing immense, unstable energy. Nami traced the ley lines on the map to their convergence point. They're not going there to fight. They're going there to build something. A container. A battery. The implication was horrifying. A physical vessel. Naruto breathed, the pieces clicking into place. They want to forge a body for Kage no O. A golem that it can inhabit to interact with our world, even while the main seal is still in place. Their target was obvious. The national treasury of the Land of Iron, a legendary fortress vault where the samurai nation stored its entire reserve of the refined, priceless metal. They had to get there first. The journey north was a punishing trek into the snow-capped mountains. The air grew thin and cold, and the disciplined, austere atmosphere of the Land of Iron was a stark contrast to the vibrant energy of Konoha. The capital was a fortress of gray stone and iron, its people reserved and watchful, their gazes lingering on the trio with suspicion. Shinobi were not welcome here. All right, Nami said, as they huddled in a small, out-of-the-way inn, spreading blueprints of the treasury she'd had Konoha's spies procure. This is a heist, not a battle. We get in, we set our trap, and we get out before anyone knows we were here. Robin, you're infiltration. Naruto, you're the diversion. I'm the mission leader. You follow my orders, exactly. Got it. Naruto looked at the complex schematics. Then at Nami's determined face, and gave her a wide, trusting grin. Got it, Captain. The plan was executed with split-second precision the following night. As a massive, LTI shadow clone, Naruto appeared on the far side of the city, engaging in a training exercise that just happened to threaten the city's outer wall. The legendary samurai General Mifune and the bulk of his forces were drawn away to confront the perceived threat. In the ensuing chaos, Robin and Nami moved. Using her powers, Robin created a chain of hands to scale the treasury's sheer outer wall, bypassing the ground-level patrols. She sprouted eyes on the other side of doors to read the intricate workings of their locks, disabling them from the inside out with delicate, precise applications of force from sprouted limbs. They finally reached the main vault, a colossal, spherical chamber made of polished, black chakra metal. The interior was a marvel of engineering, a constantly shifting mosh of moving platforms and walls designed to confuse and trap any intruder. Right on schedule, Nami whispered, checking her watch. As they slipped inside, she heard the faint hum of a spatial jutsu activating. They're here. A dozen cultists materialized in the center of the chamber, led by a tall woman with fuinjutsu seals tattooed across her face. They had come for the metal. They had no idea. They had just walked into the belly of the beast. Now, Nami yelled. Robin acted first, clapping her hands. Cyan Fleur. Delphinium. A row of arms sprouted from the floor, tripping the cultists and sending them sprawling. At the same moment, Nami threw a series of small black balls into the air. Black ball. Ryun Rod. The balls burst into storm clouds, but inside the metal sphere of the vault. Their effect was magnified 100-fold. Arcs of lightning, drawn to the conductive walls, erupted everywhere, turning the entire chamber into a supercharged cage of electricity. The walls are shifting. One of the cultists screamed as the vault's automated defense system, triggered by the energy discharge, began its chaotic dance. That's the point, Nami shouted back with a feral grin. This was her battlefield, and she knew its every move. She pointed her klima-tact. Mirage tempo. The polished metal walls became perfect mirrors, and Nami's illusions were reflected infinitely, filling vault with a dizzying army of phantom Narutos, Robins, and Namis. The cultists were overwhelmed, unable to tell friend from foe, illusion from reality. The fuinjutsu user tried to regain control, her hands flying through seals to stabilize the space. But Robin was on her. Accenta fleur. Quattro manos hold. 80 arms erupted around the woman, gripping her limbs, her torso, her head, completely immobilizing her. The rest of the cultists were herded by the shifting walls and Nami's lightning into a single, panicked group. It was the perfect setup. Naruto, his diversion complete, suddenly smashed through the ceiling, landing in the center of the room. "Sorry I'm late. Looks like you saved me a few." He held up a hand, a spiraling sphere of wind chakra forming in his palm. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. The ensuing blast, contained within the vault, was devastating. When the dust settled, the cultists were defeated, the vessel for their god denied. They made their escape as the first samurai sirens began to wail, leaving behind an unconscious squad of fanatics and a very confused General Mifune. Back in the snowy mountain passes, making their way home under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. The adrenaline of the mission finally faded. Naruto walked beside Nami, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke, his voice filled with a sincere, profound respect she had never heard from him before. "That was amazing, Nami," he said. "Shikamaru, Kakashi-sensei, none of them could figure out how to find these guys. But you did. You saw the whole board." He looked at her, his grin wide and genuine. "You know, for a while, I thought I brought you here to help me save the world. But I'm starting to think you're going to be the one teaching me how." Nami's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just praise, it was validation of the part of her that mattered most, her mind, her skill, her strategic soul. She felt a blush creep up her neck and quickly turned away to hide it. Punching him playfully on the arm. "Of course I did, you big idiot," she said, her voice lighter than air. "Now, hurry up. If we make good time, we can be back in Konoha for the new vendor market. I hear they have oranges from a new trade partner." He laughed, a warm, bright sound in the cold mountain air. And as they walked on, the distance between them seemed to shrink, the playful banter now charged with the unmistakable current of something deeper. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Festival of Shadows. For a month, a fragile peace settled over the elemental nations. The cult of the Shadow Sovereign, dealt a stunning blow in the land of iron, had seemingly vanished. The whispers of the Whispering God fell silent. In this quiet reprieve, Konoha began preparations for its Grandes Tea celebration, the annual festival commemorating the end of the Fourth Great Ninja War. The village thrummed with a joyous, vibrant energy, a collective exhalation after years of conflict. For Naruto, Nami, and Robin, it was a chance to simply live. The weight of their cosmic struggle receded, replaced by the simple, profound pleasure of a shared life. Their domesticity evolved with an easy, unspoken rhythm. Their 3 apartments, interconnected by a shared balcony Naruto had commissioned, became a single home. The festival was their playground. Nami, with her brilliant, calculating mind, descended upon the game stalls like a force of nature. She didn't cheat. She simply understood the odds better than the carnies running the games. She charted the trajectory of the ring toss, calculated the precise force needed for the high striker, and mapped the probability distribution of the prize wheel. She walked away with a mountain of prizes, her arms laden with oversized stuffed animals and trinkets, laughing all the way as she handed them out to wide-eyed children. Robin, who had spent a lifetime in shadows, blossomed in the festival's light. Her smiles were more frequent, her laughter easier. She allowed herself moments of playfulness, using a single, sprouted hand to subtly tip a goldfish into a little boy's net at a scooping game, earning a delighted squeal. She was no longer just an observer of life. She was a participant. Naruto was the picture of contentment. He walked through the village, a girl on each arm, not as the world's saving hero, but as a young man showing off his home. He bought them candied apples and takoyaki, introduced them to his friends with a proud, beaming grin, and for the first time since the war, the title of hero didn't feel like a heavy cloak of responsibility, but like a simple statement of fact. He had saved this world, and now he was finally getting to enjoy it. As dusk fell, casting the village in the warm glow of 1,000 paper lanterns, the 3 of them stood on their balcony, watching the crowds below. Naruto turned to Nami and Robin, a small, official-looking scroll in his hand. I got you something," he said, a rare hint of nervousness in his voice. He handed it to them. It was the deed, not to one apartment, but to both of theirs, signed over to them, no strings attached. This is your home now, he said, his voice quiet and sincere. For as long as you want it. You're not guests, you're family. Nami's usually sharp tongue was lost for words. Robin's eyes glistened with an emotion she rarely showed. It was more than a gift of property. It was a declaration, an anchor, a permanent place in his world, and in his life. Later that night, they stood shoulder to shoulder on the Hokage monument, joining the rest of the village to watch the fireworks. As the first explosive blossom of light filled the sky, painting their faces in vibrant hues of red and gold, Robin leaned her head on Naruto's shoulder. I have never felt so at peace, she murmured. I could get used to this, Nami added from his other side, her hand finding his. It was a perfect moment. A fragile, beautiful bubble of happiness. And it was about to burst. The first sign something was wrong was not a sound, but a silence. A sudden, chilling deadening of the ambient noise of the festival. Then, the lights in the village below flickered and died, plunging them into a darkness broken only by the now ominous explosions of the fireworks overhead. Screams began to echo up from the streets. Shadows detached themselves from the alleys and rooftops below, dozens. Then hundreds of them. The cultists had returned, moving with silent, brutal efficiency. This wasn't a terror attack, it was a military invasion. Before Naruto could even react, a figure landed softly on the stone head of the first Hokage, silhouetted against a burst of green light. He wasn't a cultist in a masked robe. He wore the flak jacket of a Konoha Jonin, but it was tattered and ancient. His long, sun-bleached blonde hair was unmistakable, as were the sharp, handsome features that had once been carved onto a memorial stone. Tsunade, standing nearby, gasped, her voice a choked whisper. No, it can't be. Hayama. The name sent a ripple of shock through the older shinobi. Hayama Senko, Konoha's Sun Flash, a hero of the Third Great Ninja War, a contemporary of Minato Namikaze. Said to have died protecting his squad in a blaze of glory. But the man standing before them was no hero. The life in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, dead void. Black, corrupted sage markings snaked across his face, and the air around him vibrated with the same stagnant, soul-crushing energy they had felt in the ruins. Hello, Tsunade Haim, Hayama said, his voice a dry rasp, a desecration of a voice many had once revered. I have returned. Chaos erupted. Naruto shoved Nami and Robin behind him. Get to the evacuation shelters. Help the villagers. Like hell. Nami snapped, her klima tacked already in her hand. We're not leaving you. Go. Naruto roared, his body already erupting in the golden cloak of the Nine Tails chakra mode. This one is different. He's strong. Get the people to safety. That's an order from your mission leader. The reference to their heist in the Land of Iron, to his trust in her leadership, cut through her protest. She understood. This was his fight. Theirs was for the village. She grabbed Robin's arm, and they leapt from the monument, plunging into the chaos below. Naruto turned to face the corrupted legend. Whoever you are, you're not Hayama, he growled. The thing in Hayama's body smiled. I am his resolve, purified. He died regretting his weakness. Our God offered him true strength. The battle that followed was an apocalypse in miniature. Naruto, in his full Six Paths Sage mode, clashed with Hayama's Shadow Sage mode in a devastating ballet of light and darkness. They were a blur of gold and black, their blows shattering the stone faces of the Hokage, leveling the forest below, and sending shockwaves that flattened buildings miles away. Hayama was everything Malachor had been, magnified 100-fold. He was faster, stronger. His control over the shadows absolute. He turned the very ground beneath Naruto's feet into a weapon, a grasping prison of darkness. Below, the village had become a war zone. But it was not without its defenders. Nami and Robin became beacons in the mayhem. Seal off this street. Get the civilians to the academy. Nami yelled, her voice cutting through the panic. She stood atop a building, using her klima tact to create a massive, dense fog bank, confusing the invading cultists and providing cover for squads of Chunin to evacuate families. When a squad of assassins broke through, she met them with a furious thunderbolt. Her face a mask of grim determination. Robin was a silent, avenging angel. She moved through the most dangerous zones, a whirlwind of blossoming limbs. An arm would sprout from a wall to shove a child out of the way of a collapsing building. A dozen hands would emerge from the ground to disarm and incapacitate a squad of cultists before they could ambush a team of medics. She saved hundreds of lives without speaking a single word, her actions a testament to the vow she had made to protect her new home. Naruto, fighting with all his might, finally saw an opening. He poured every ounce of his power into a final, cataclysmic attack, a tailed beast bomb Rasenshuriken. The sphere of light and shadow screamed through the air, hitting Hayama dead on. The explosion was immense, vaporizing the top of the monument and lighting up the night sky like a second sun. For a moment, there was silence. Then, from the epicenter of the blast, Hayama's body floated, impossibly unharmed. His eyes glowing with a terrifying, multi-hued light. His purpose as a warrior was over. He was now simply a conduit. The sky above Konoha tore open. Not with a physical rift, but with a crushing wave of pure psychic malevolence. Every man, woman, and child in the village was paralyzed, their minds filled with a chorus of a million dry, whispering voices, all speaking as one. Such bright lights, in so much darkness, the voice of Kage no echoed in their skulls. It was a voice of absolute entropy, of cosmic loneliness and ravenous hunger. It focused its attention on Naruto. Hero, you build bonds of light and love, thinking they are foundations. They are not. They are kindling. Delicate, transient flames I shall enjoy extinguishing, one by one. The god's gaze swept over the village, over the terrified faces of Naruto's friends. This world is loud, messy, flawed. I will grant it a gift. The gift of silence. The gift of perfection. I will turn this world into a beautiful, silent tomb. A monument to the peace you could never achieve yourselves. The psychic pressure vanished. Hayama's body, now a husk, dissolved into a flurry of black ash, carried away by the wind. The attack was over. Naruto stood alone amidst the ruins of the Hokage monument, looking down at the fires, at the craters, at the horrified, upturned faces of his people. The joy of the festival had been burned away, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the war to come. A god had declared its intentions, and its battlefield was their home. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Weight of Worlds. The dawn that broke over Konoha was a thing of ash and sorrow. The vibrant colors of the festival had been replaced by a monochrome palette of gray dust, black scorch marks, and the grim crimson of drying blood. The air, once filled with laughter and music, now carried the stench of smoke and the mournful sounds of rescue efforts, the scrape of shovels against rubble, the strained calls of medics, and the quiet, choked sobs of those who had lost everything. In the heart of the devastation, Naruto, Nami, and Robin worked tirelessly. The golden glow of Naruto's chakra cloak was a beacon of hope in the dust-choked streets. His immense strength allowing him to lift entire collapsed walls to free those trapped beneath. Nami, her face smudged with soot, had become a field commander, her sharp, clear voice directing rescue teams with logistical precision, ensuring that aid went where it was needed most. Robin moved like a silent guardian, her blossoming arms reaching into precarious ruins to gently lift injured civilians to safety. Her calm presence a steadying force in the overwhelming chaos. They were no longer heroes or strangers, they were simply three people fighting desperately to save their home. Within 24 hours, the leaders of the elemental nations arrived. The emergency cage summit was convened not in the grand, high-ceiling chamber of the Hokage Tower, but in a stark, subterranean military bunker. A place built for the end of the world. The mood was grim. Gaara's face was a stone mask of controlled fury. Darui, the Raikage, radiated a tense, crackling energy. Chojuro seemed overwhelmed, the horror in his own village still fresh in his mind. And Kuretsuchi, the Tsuchikage of Iwagakure, wore an expression of hard, unflinching pragmatism. The psychic assault from Kage no had been felt by high-level sensory ninja across the continent. They all understood the scope of the threat. This was not a war for territory or resources. It was a war for existence itself. Its voice, it felt ancient, Chojuro murmured, breaking the tense silence. Like the ocean floor, cold and empty. Its proxy was Hayama Senko of our village, Kakashi informed them, his voice heavy. A hero from the Third War. It can corrupt and weaponize even the most revered souls. The discussion turned to strategy, to defenses, to the pooling of resources. But an unspoken tension lay beneath it all, a single, terrifying variable that no one wanted to address. Finally, Kuretsuchi, ever the pragmatist, gave it a voice. "Let us not be delicate," she began, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room before landing on Naruto. This entity, this shadow sovereign, was imprisoned for millennia. It only began to stir, its influence only began to be felt, after a certain event. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. It began when they arrived. She gave a curt nod toward the antechamber where Nami and Robin were waiting. The accusation, though not malicious, hung in the air like a blade. "They are not our enemies," Gaara stated flatly, his sand stirring faintly in its gourd. "I am not suggesting they are," Kuretsuchi countered, her voice as hard as the stones of her village. "I am a strategist. I am looking at cause and effect. Your forbidden scroll, Uzumaki Naruto, acted as the key that turned in a rusty lock. They were what came through the door. Is it not logical to awesome? That sending them back would be the equivalent of closing that door. Perhaps even relocking it." The idea was seductive in its simplicity. A single, decisive act to potentially end the threat before it truly began. Scholars from Kumogakure, patched in via a communication scroll, presented a hasty but plausible theory. By analyzing the remnants of Jiraiya's scroll and combining it with their own advanced knowledge of spatial fuinjutsu, they believed they could reverse the summoning. It would be astronomically difficult and dangerous, requiring the combined chakra of all 5 Kage, plus Naruto as the original caster, to generate enough power to punch a hole back to the correct reality. They couldn't guarantee it would sever the sovereign's connection, but it was, they argued, a more viable option than waging a war against a literal god. Naruto felt the entire world press down on his shoulders. The leaders of the allied shinobi forces were looking at him, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and grim expectation. They were asking him to sacrifice the 2 people he loved for the slim chance of saving the world. It was a choice that would define him, not as a hero, but as a leader. His duty against his heart. The weight of worlds against the weight of his family. He looked down at his hands, the silence in the room roaring in his ears. Before he could speak, the doors to the antechamber opened. Nami and Robin walked into the center of the bunker, their expressions resolute. They had heard everything. "This is not his decision to make," Nami said, her voice ringing with a surprising authority that commanded the attention of every Kage. She swept her gaze across their faces, her eyes blazing with a navigator's fire. "And running away is not a strategy, it's a coward's gambit." She pointed a finger at the map on the table. "You think this thing will stop with your world if we're gone? It's a devourer of realities. Sending us back won't lock the door, it'll just point it toward a new meal. My home, my friends, they would be next. Everything I know and love would be consumed. This is not just your war. It has been my war since the moment I arrived. My skills, my knowledge, and my life are now dedicated to winning it. I am not a visitor to be sent away. I am a soldier of this alliance, and I will not abandon my post." As Nami's fiery, pragmatic declaration settled, Robin stepped forward. Her presence a pool of unshakable calm. She addressed the Kage, but her eyes were on Naruto. "In my world," she began, her voice low but carrying an immense weight of history. "There is a government that has ruled for centuries. Their foundation is built upon a single principle, that some knowledge is too dangerous to exist. They taught the world that sacrificing history and running from the past is the only way to ensure peace. For this belief, they annihilated my home and hunted me my entire life." She looked at each leader, her gaze piercing. This Kage no-O is a tyrant of existence itself. Its power is fear. Its goal is a silent, empty history. To send us away in the hope that it will be appeased is to accept the same rotten philosophy that destroyed my people. We must not appease. We must not run. We must stand, and we must learn, and we must fight. She finally turned fully to Naruto, a soft, unwavering smile on her face. "For 20 years, I ran. But I am not running anymore. This village, this world, gave me a home when I had none. I will not abandon it." Their unified, unshakable resolve was a force more powerful than any jutsu. It was the power of conviction. The cage were stunned into silence, the cold logic of their desperation shamed by the raw courage of the two women. Gaara was the first to rise. Sunagakure stands with Konoha, he stated, his eyes fixed on Naruto with profound respect. And we stand with its defenders, no matter where they were born. One by one, the other cage stood, their doubts washed away by the tide of inspiration. A new alliance was forged in that bunker, stronger and more resolute than ever before. An alliance not just of nations, but of worlds. That night, the trio stood on the shattered remnants of their shared balcony, looking out over the wounded, yet resilient, village. The immense pressure of the day had receded, leaving behind a raw, fragile intimacy. All the unspoken things, all the playful banter and quiet moments that had danced around the truth, now felt insufficient. I thought I was going to lose you today, Naruto said, his voice barely a whisper. When they asked me to, I didn't know what I would do. You would have done the right thing, Nami said softly, leaning against him. But we weren't going to let you. Robin stood on his other side, taking his hand. We make our own choices now, she said, her thumb gently stroking his knuckles. And we choose to be here. With you. He looked from Nami's fierce, loving eyes to Robin's calm, devoted gaze. The love he felt for them was a physical ache in his chest. A brilliant, burning sun that pushed back the encroaching darkness. There were no more questions, no more hesitations. He gently pulled Nami closer with one arm, while his other hand tightened its grip on Robin's. In the quiet devastation of their home, surrounded by the ghosts of what they had almost lost, they finally let the truth settle. It wasn't a dramatic confession, but a quiet, mutual understanding, a silent promise. They had faced the end of their world, had the weight of all worlds placed upon them, and they had chosen each other. They were a family, forged in the fires of an interdimensional war, bound by a love that defied logic and a shared destiny to face the coming storm. Together. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Sovereign's Ascent. The war began not with a clash of armies, but in the quiet, tense atmosphere of the Alliance War Council. In the subterranean command bunker of Konoha, a new trinity of leadership had emerged alongside the seasoned minds of Kakashi and Shikamaru Nara. The map table, once a tool for tracking troop movements, was now a dynamic representation of a living, breathing battlefield, with Nami at its head. She was no longer just a navigator. She was the Alliance's chief of strategic deployment. Her complex, color-coded maps charted not just borders, but the flow of natural energy across the continent. She directed the armies of 5 nations like a maestro, her commands precise and prescient. The energy flow is surging toward the mountains in the land of lightning, she'd announce, her voice crisp and clear. Reikage Dono, concentrate your forces on Sector Gamma. They will strike there within the next 6 hours. And they always did. Robin, in turn, had become the Alliance's spymaster, its shadow of a different sort. As head of the newly formed Special Intelligence and Operations Division, she sifted through the mountains of historical and arcane texts that poured in from every nation, finding the patterns, the rituals, the ancient lore that explained the enemy's movements. Her elite teams, a hand-picked collection of the shinobi world's best stealth operatives, would then move, striking with surgical precision to disrupt the cult's plans before they could even begin. And Naruto was their son, the supreme commander of the allied shinobi forces. He was their ultimate weapon, a golden meteor of hope deployed to the most critical, desperate fronts. But more than that, he was the heart of the war effort. His presence on a battlefield, his voice carried over the communication network, could turn a rout into a rally. Despair into defiance. The war ignited across the globe, a series of brutal, simultaneous conflagrations designed to bleed the Alliance dry. In the cloud-raked peaks of the Land of Lightning, a colossal creature of solidified shadow, a lesser avatar of the Sovereign, rose from a chasm. It was a beast of living darkness, its form shifting and unstable, and it began to consume the vast stores of chakra from Kumogakure's legendary infinite armory. Darui, the Reikage, and his shinobi fought with a storm of black lightning and furious taijutsu, but their attacks were swallowed by the creature's amorphous body. Just as their lines were about to break, the sky split open. Naruto descended, wreathed in the incandescent gold of his 6 paths sage mode. The clash was primordial, a battle of absolute light against absolute dark. His tailed beast bomb, a miniature sun, slammed into the creature, and for a moment, the entire mountain range was bathed in a cleansing, brilliant dawn. Miles away, in the desolate, windswept plateaus of the land of Earth, Robin led a silent charge. Dressed in the black fatigues of the Alliance, she moved like a whisper, flanked by the ink and shadow forms of Psi and former root operatives. Their intelligence had pointed to a hidden cultist cell performing a ritual to poison the continent's ley lines, to turn the very lifeblood of the world toxic. There was no grand battle, just a series of silent, chillingly efficient takedowns in the darkness of a deep cave system. Robin dismantled the intricate Fuinjutsu array not with explosives, but by deciphering its core structure and having her team remove key components in a precise sequence, causing the massive ritual to simply fail. They were gone before the remaining cultists even knew they had been compromised. And from the Central Command bunker in Konoha, Nami waged her own war. Shadowy leviathans, born from the Sovereign's encroaching influence, were rising from the depths to assault the naval routes to the land of water. It was a strategic move to isolate the island nation and cut off reinforcements. Nami, coordinating with the Mist Fleet and Konoha's Sensory Corps, became a goddess of the sea. Typhoon is forming at coordinates Delta 7, she'd command, her eyes scanning a dozen weather charts and intelligence reports. Mizukage Dono, have your fleet feign a retreat and lead them into the strait. I will make sure the storm hits at precisely 1800 hours. She wielded the weather as a weapon of war, creating maelstroms and directing lightning strikes with the attack. Head precision of a grandmaster playing chess. They were winning. On every front, the Alliance, guided by the trio's unique and perfectly synchronized talents, was pushing back the tide of darkness. EY communicated constantly via the Yamanaka clan's telepathic network, their minds linked across hundreds of miles. Nami's strategies, Robin's intelligence, and Naruto's power worked as a single, unstoppable force. Yet, a sense of deep unease began to settle in Naruto's gut. The victories felt too easy, too numerous. They're letting us win, Kit, Kurama rumbled in his mind during a rare moment of quiet. This is all a distraction. We're swatting at the flies while the real beast is gorging itself somewhere else. The horrifying truth came from Robin. She had been piecing together the most fragmented, esoteric texts, one of which spoke of a final, apocalyptic ritual called the Tenchi Gyukuden, the inversion of heaven and earth. She burst into the main command center, her face pale. It's a feint, she announced, her voice strained with urgency. The entire war is a feint. We thought they were harvesting energy for a vessel, but it's so much worse. She laid a scroll on the main table. The global conflict, the massive expenditure of chakra from both sides, the lives lost, it's all being harvested. Siphoned by a planetary scale seal hidden within the ley lines themselves. They aren't just trying to break the seal on their god's prison. They are planning to use the harvested energy of our entire world at war to power a ritual of inversion. Shikamaru's eyes widened in horror. Inversion. They are going to pull the dimensional rift, the sovereign's prison, inside out, Robin explained, her voice trembling slightly. They will merge that empty reality with our own. Not an invasion, a replacement, an erasure. And they can only do it at the single weakest point of the original seal, a place so scarred with power and conflict that it's already half torn between worlds. Every eye in the room turned to the map, to the scar on the face of the continent that had defined its history. The Valley of the End, Naruto breathed. At that exact moment, the sky across the entire planet began to bleed into a bruised, sickly purple. The energy sensors went berserk. The ley lines weren't just being drained, they were hemorrhaging, all their power flowing toward that single, fateful valley. From the ground in every nation, monstrous shadow creatures, larger and more powerful than any they had yet seen, began to claw their way to the surface, a final, desperate, global defense to stop anyone from reaching the ritual site. He played us all, Nami whispered, her face ashen as her strategic maps turned into a sea of red alerts. The battle isn't here, Naruto declared, his body already beginning to glow with golden power. It's there, now. An elite team was formed in an instant. Naruto, Nami, and Robin were its heart. Gaara, refusing to let his friend go alone, his sand swirling with rage, was at his side. And then, In a swirl of black flames, a final figure appeared in the bunker. Sasuke Uchiha, his rinnegan blazing, drawn from his lonely pilgrimage by the cosmic scream of reality tearing itself apart. "It seems you're in trouble again, Dobi." The five of them broke through the Konoha defenses, a spear tip of unimaginable power, and raced toward the valley. They flew over a world descending into chaos. The desperate last stand of the allied shinobi forces buying them the precious minutes they needed. They arrived at the precipice of the Valley of the End to a scene of cosmic horror. The sky above was a swirling vortex of black and purple nothingness. The air was thin, the sound deadened. And between the colossal, crumbling statues of Hashirama and Madara, reality was unraveling. A great, shimmering tear in the world pulsed like a black heart, and standing before it, his hands outstretched, was the resurrected, empty form of Hayama Senko. He was the final key. The conduit channeling the lifeblood of a dying world into the abyss, fueling the end of everything. The final battle had come. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The dawn of a new era. The world held its breath as the five figures descended into the Valley of the End. Below them, the colossal statues of Hashirama and Madara, eternal rivals, now served as silent witnesses to a conflict that would dwarf their own legendary battles. Between them, the resurrected hero Hayama stood as the final gatekeeper, a puppet channeling the agony of a world at war into the ravenous, reality-tearing vortex behind him. There were no words, no challenges. The final battle began in an instant of explosive, synchronized action. "He is the conduit," Nami yelled over the howling wind, her eyes scanning the chaos. "I see torrent of energy flowing through Hayama's body. The flow is unstable at the seals on his joints. Target them." Naruto and Sasuke became a singular entity of destruction and creation. A six paths empowered Rasengan, blazing like a miniature star, met a Chidori crackling with the black lightning of the Rinnegan. Their taijutsu was a blur, a dance of gold and violet light that hammered at Hayama's defenses. The corrupted hero, now an avatar for a god's power, was impossibly strong, his shadow-based attacks eroding everything they touched. Gaara's sand rose not as a wave, but as a living mountain, forming a vast, sweeping shield that intercepted the tidal waves of chaotic energy erupting from the rift. He was the immovable wall against which the storm of the apocalypse broke. While the titans clashed, Nami and Robin executed their own deadly strategy. "Now, Robin," Nami shouted, pointing his left knee. "The conduit is exposed. See and fleur. Spider net." Robin commanded. 100 arms sprouted directly from Hayama's body, weaving together with lightning speed into a complex web that latched onto the Fuinjutsu seal. Twist. The arms torqued with incredible force. Hayama roared, a sound of grinding stone and tearing fabric, as the vital energy flow was momentarily disrupted. In that split second of faltering, Naruto and Sasuke struck. Their combined attack, an Amaterasu-wreathed Kurama avatar fist, slammed into Hayama's chest. The conduit shattered. The hero's body, a vessel that had long since been emptied of its soul, crumbled into a fine gray dust that was instantly devoured by the vortex. But his purpose was served. The final surge of harvested energy flowed into the rift. The ritual was complete. It was too late. With a sound that was a violation of physics, the sound of a vacuum imploding, the rift shattered. The world went silent. Light, heat, and sound were all pulled into the abyss that now stood where the tear had been. From that hole in reality, the Cage no-O emerged. It was not a monster of flesh and scale. It was a humanoid-shaped void, a patch of starless night that was actively consuming the world around it. The very rock of the valley floor turned gray and brittle, its essence draining away. The roar of the waterfall ceased, the water turning to motionless dust in midair. It was the physical embodiment of entropy, of absolute zero, of the end. Sasuke's perfect Susanoo materialized around him, a colossal shield of purple chakra. But as the sovereign took a step, the Susanoo began to crack and flicker, its power not being broken, but simply unmade. "Ninjutsu is useless," Sasuke grunted, the strain evident in his voice. "It's erasing the chakra before it can even have an effect." Naruto fired a tailed beast bomb, a condensed sphere of apocalyptic power. It flew toward the sovereign, and instead of exploding, it vanished. It did not detonate. It did not dissipate. It simply ceased to be. Despair, cold and absolute, began to creep into their hearts. How could they fight a thing whose very nature was to unmake existence? It was in that moment of ultimate despair, looking at the faces of his friends, that Naruto understood. His mind flashed back to the words of the old sage, to the fundamental principles of creation and destruction. The sovereign was a void. A void cannot be fought, cannot be filled by force. It only grows larger. A void can only be defeated by filling it with something it cannot erase. It could not be defeated by the concept of power. It had to be defeated by the concept of being. It feeds on energy, Naruto said, his voice quiet but clear amid the unnatural silence. It feeds on our fear, on our hate, on our despair. That's why it started a war. We can't destroy it. We have to complete it. He looked at Sasuke, at Nami, at Robin, at Gaara. We can't fight the nothingness. We have to overwhelm it with everything. Sasuke's Rinnegan widened as he understood the insane, beautiful logic. This was not a battle to be won with ninjutsu. It was a battle of concepts. I can connect you, Sasuke said, his own resolve hardening. My eye can link your heart to theirs. To everyone's. Naruto nodded. He earned to the two women who had become his world. I need you, not your power. You, your will, your life. There was no hesitation. Nami and Robin stepped forward, placing their hands on his back. They were his anchors in a sea of non-existence. Naruto closed his eyes, and with Sasuke as his conduit, he reached out. Across the planet, in the midst of 100 desperate last stands, they felt him. Shikamaru, directing a losing battle in Konoha, looked up. Sakura, her hands glowing with green chakra as she healed the wounded, felt a familiar warmth. Kakashi, Tsunade, the cage, the nameless Shino. By holding the line against the shadow beasts, they all felt a touch on their souls. Naruto wasn't asking for their chakra. He was asking for their hope, their love, their memories of sunlight, the bonds they were fighting and dying for. He gathered it all. The fierce loyalty of Sasuke, the adventurous spirit of Nami, the quiet strength of Robin, the unwavering friendship of Gaara. The hope of a million souls. The collective life force of an entire planet that refused to go silently into the void. In Naruto's hands, a sphere of light began to form. It was not the crackling, destructive energy of a Rasengan. It was a gentle, brilliant, golden light, a miniature sun that pulsed with the warmth of a billion cherished memories. It did not radiate power, it radiated life. He called it Taiyo no Sozo, the genesis of the sun. He pushed the sun forward. It did not fly, it simply moved, a concept of pure life and connection propelled toward its conceptual opposite. The sovereign, an entity of pure hunger, did what it always did, it absorbed it. But it could not unmake it. The light did not explode. It spread. From within the void, the golden sun bloomed, filling the emptiness not with power, but with presence. The sovereign, which had only ever known nothingness, was suddenly filled with everything: love, hope, friendship, pain, joy, memory. The positive life energy of an entire reality was anathema to its being. It did not scream. It simply dissolved. The paradox of its existence could not be sustained. The inverted rift collapsed, its power source gone, and it was violently shunted back into its prison dimension. Now inert and complete, the tear in reality healed itself, leaving behind a sky of impossible, brilliant blue. The silence was broken by the roar of the waterfall, rushing back to life. The world began to breathe again. 6 months later, the world was rebuilding, but it was not the same. The scars on the landscape were healing, but the scars on the heart of the nations had changed them forever. The allied shinobi forces was no longer a temporary military pact. It was a permanent, unified governing body, its foundation forged in the crucible of a cosmic war. In Konoha, life had found a new, vibrant rhythm, and at the heart of it was the small, interconnected home of its soon-to-be Hokage. Nami stood before a massive, beautifully detailed map that covered an entire wall of her office. It was the first truly complete map of the elemental nations, a masterpiece of cartography that now served as the standard for the entire continent. As the newly appointed EAD of the Alliance's Trade and Exploration Guild, she now commanded fleets of ships, charting new, peaceful routes between nations, her brilliant mind now dedicated to building prosperity instead of just acquiring it. Robin, meanwhile, sat in the great library, surrounded by scholars from all 5 nations. She was the world's foremost historian, the architect of the Grand Concordance, a project to create a single, unified, and truthful history of their world, ensuring the secrets of the past were preserved as lessons, not weapons. She had finally found a history worth protecting instead of one to hide from. Naruto walked out onto the newly rebuilt Hokage monument, the setting sun casting a warm, orange glow on his face. He was no longer the lonely boy who had once stared out at the village, but a man at peace. A leader who had found his purpose not just in saving the world, but in building a life within it. He heard footsteps and turned. Nami and Robin were there, their hands finding his as they stood beside him. Looking out at the village. Their home. Nami, with a mischievous sparkle in her eye, unrolled a smaller, much older sea chart. It was a map of the Grand Line, of her old world. She held it up next to the view of their new one. "So," she said, her voice filled with a familiar, adventurous grin. "Once you're done with all this Hokage business, which sea do we conquer next?" Naruto looked from the old map to the endless horizon of his own world, then at the 2 women who were his everything. He laughed, a deep, free, and utterly happy sound that echoed across the valley. Robin leaned her head against his shoulder, a genuine, peaceful smile gracing her lips, a smile that finally, truly reached her eyes. They had faced the end of all things, and in doing so, had found their new beginning. They had found their adventure, their home, and their one piece of treasure, right here, together. Chapter 10 End.